Okay, so Solomon was the illegitimate son of King David and a woman named Bathsheba. So it was actually kind of a scandalous story. Bathsheba's husband was in David's army, and David saw Bathsheba and he was like, "Oh, hey, like she's really awesome. Like she looks really beautiful," and so he wanted to sleep with her. So he slept with her, and she got pregnant, and so he actually sent Bathsheba's husband to the front lines so that he would be killed. So, despite the fact that David is a really great guy most of the time, that was one of his really weak moments. But anyway, that was the way that Solomon was born. And interestingly, he actually became David's favorite son. And so when David passed away, he gave his kingdom to Solomon, which included like Judah, and it was like in Jerusalem, if y'all know, like it was considered like the holy city of God. And so after Solomon became king, God appeared to him in a dream and said, "Ask me anything you want and I'll give it to you." And so Solomon said, "You know what, I want to have wisdom so that I can govern my people best." And God was really happy about that. He was like, "Well, that's awesome." And so he said, that was basically, to some degree it was a test, and he said, "You passed." And he said, "Because you asked such a humble answer, and you didn't ask for like riches or a long life, I'll grant all of these to you in addition to your wisdom." And so Solomon became one of the greatest kings that Judah ever had, and he made many wise decisions, and that includes the mediation between the two prostitute mothers. If you remember, like that one story Miss Viegas was talking about, where she said, where the baby was like, he threatened to cut the baby in half and such, and so then the real mom, he found out who the real mom is because she said, "No, don't do it, give it to the other one." Anyway, so that was one of his many wise decisions. And he also finished a temple that David had wanted to build for God, and that he started but he didn't get to finish before he died. And he's also well known for having 1,000 wives, which was actually 300 wives and 700 concubines, which concubines were basically like the king's sex toys. They were meant for producing sons, which okay, it's gross, but whatever. And anyway, so all these wives were not faithful to God, and they ended up actually turning Solomon's heart so that he wasn't really a God-fearing man anymore. And God ended up punishing him for this, and he kind of died like a sad death because everybody started turning on him. But anyway, so that was because of his bad decision, and that was Solomon. Great king, but sad death. Okay, so Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors. Pretty cool story. One of my favorites. So Jacob, who is also named Israel, had 2 wives and 12 sons. And so his favorite wife was actually Rachel, and she only had 2 sons, and that was Benjamin and Joseph. And so Joseph was the firstborn, and he was basically Jacob's favorite, like by far. And all of his sons knew it too. And so because he was his favorite, Jacob made Joseph this beautiful, richly ornamented robe. That's the quote from the Bible. And gave it to Joseph. And all of his brothers were, of course, even more upset about that. Well, Joseph kind of had a big mouth on him, I guess, because he had these 2 dreams. And he told his brothers about them. One of them was that they were like picking wheat in a field, and like all the brothers' wheat bowed down to his wheat. And then another one was that all the sun and the moon and the stars were bowing down to Joseph, and so basically the brothers are like, he's trying to say that like we're gonna bow down to him one day, like that's ridiculous. And so it really made him mad. And so one day he was out in the field, and his brothers kind of took a hold of him and grabbed his robe and threw him down a well. And eventually these slave dealers, I guess, drove by and they sold him as a slave. And they basically took his robe and kind of tore it up, and they put some goat blood on it to make it look like he had like bled on it. And they gave it to Jacob, and poor Jacob thought that his favorite son had been eaten by a wild animal. And so meanwhile, Joseph, being a slave, he was sold to this Egyptian man named Potiphar. Well, Potiphar had this wife that kept hitting on Joseph. And Joseph said, like, no, I'm not going to sleep with you. You're my master's wife. And so eventually she got really tired of him turning her down, so she claimed that he had tried to rape her at one point. And so poor Joseph got thrown in jail because he's going to believe a slave against a rich woman, right? And so while he was in jail, he met these two men. One of them was the king's baker, and one of them was the king's cupbearer. And they both told him about these strange dreams that they had. And Joseph basically asked God for help, and then he interpreted both of the dreams. And he interpreted them both correctly. The baker actually ended up dying, and the cupbearer ended up going back into service for the king, or the pharaoh, I guess technically, because they're in Egypt. And this was exactly what Joseph had interpreted the dreams to mean. And so when he went back to the king, the cupbearer told him, the pharaoh. The cupbearer told Pharaoh about this incredible man that he had met while he was in jail that could interpret dreams like to a T. And so Pharaoh called him to him because he had been having this strange dream. And so Joseph, in the presence of Pharaoh, basically asked God for help, and he interpreted both of Pharaoh, because Pharaoh was having two dreams. One of them was about 14 cows, and the other one was about 14 stalks of grain. So he interpreted both of these dreams to mean that there would be 7 years of good fortune and good harvest, but then there would be 7 years of famine in the land. So he predicted this, or he interpreted the dream to be this. And he advised Pharaoh to get like kind of a second in command to kind of help him prepare for this famine. So Pharaoh was like, well, shoot, like I want you. So he puts Jacob basically into second in command of all of Egypt, which, obviously it's a big deal. And so he basically saved Egypt and much of the surrounding lands from the famine, and this included his brothers. And he eventually revealed to his brothers that it was him, because they began to interact with him. And there's kind of this big long story about how Joseph basically was playing tricks on them and stuff, and eventually he revealed to himself that it was his brother, or their brother. But basically, so yeah, Joseph saves everybody from the famine, and that's the story of Joseph in the Coat of Many Colors.